Hi, this is Matt from Work in Fintech. Today I'm joined by Jag Singh, who's an undergrad studying physics at Leicester University, and we're delighted to bring on today the great Ying Cao. I'll hand over to you, Jag, because you've got a ton of questions for Ying. And just before we do, Ying, do you want to just give yourself a quick introduction?
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much, Matt and Jack, for having me here today. It's a great pleasure to talk about working in fintech with you both. My name is Ying Cao. I'm the CEO and founder of LIYT. So LIYT stands for Living in Your Truth. It's a digital coaching platform that enables high achievers to accelerate their goals in life and business, leveraging ontological coaching framework to achieve rapid transformation. I grew up in China and have spent the last 15 years on Wall Street, and I can't wait to tell you more about how to work in fintech.
That's great. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have you on the podcast. Fintech has a different meaning for everyone that you meet. So for some, it's the use of technology in finance, and for some, it's the modernization of the industry itself. How would you define fintech yourself?
That's a great question. I think to me, fintech really means everything that touches finance and technology. It could be financial companies looking to leverage technology for automation and accelerate revenue growth, or technology companies looking to go deeper into the financial service industry or vertical for disruptions and new business models. I think it's the intersection of the two most rapidly growing industries that make the world of fintech so fascinating and innovative. So I would say whenever I think about fintech, I think something as disruption and innovation.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So early on in your career, you worked as a strategy consultant at the Oliver Wyman Group, where you advised Fortune 500 companies. How has the perspective on technology and finance changed from when you worked with them?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I grew up in China and I came to the States for my graduate school at Yale to study economics. And after that, I worked for Oliver Wyman for 4 years, right, as a strategic consultant, really advising 500 Fortune 500 companies. And after that, I joined Barclays, right, and spent 10 years at there. I think tied to your question earlier, based on the work that I have done at Oliver Wyman, I would really say that with hindsight, it's great to start your career in consulting because you were trained to really think strategically and with the big picture in mind, more of a top-down approach. And this is very different from most of your other job, where you were usually trained to just get things done and focus on immediate execution, which I call it is really a bottom-up approach, right? You learn your way and kind of really think about strategic directions way later in your career. So I think with that, and then by working in the consulting industry, we had the opportunity to work with different companies on most strategic initiatives. So I saw firsthand how technology and finance combined can create exceptional growth. I would say compared to almost 15 years ago when I started as a strategic consultant, I see now there are more focus in the fintech industry on the business model disruptions. Such as Uber, right? Like we had taxis, we have cars, and we never really thought of to start a company like Uber that really kind of connect all the normal people together. That to me is a business model disruption and the business model innovation. And the question is how we can apply something like that in the realm of traditional finance activities. And I think you will see more companies and more focus on that particular, business model innovation. Well, 15 years ago, I think the focus in the industry has really been how to leverage technology for automation and bringing efficiencies in the industry, right? So you can see with the success of that, there's more focus on, how to make the impossible possible and how to really think outside of the box.
Could I just ask a quick question on Yale? Yeah, because Yale University is kind of a star-studded university, and everyone's heard the name. What was your experience like there, and how did you end up there from being in Peking University before?
Yeah, it was amazing experience. I would say so. Peking University is one of the two best universities in China, and then it was very competitive to get into Peking University. Right, I had a really great time. Right, spending 4 years as an undergrad, also study economics. Is in my third year, like the junior year in college, I got the opportunity to join an exchange program with Yale. So I came to Yale as an undergrad student for the exchange program. And I remember when I was traveling in the airport of New Haven, and someone asked me and said, "Hey, are you a student of Yale?" And I said, "Yes." And then he commented on, like, "Wow, that's a great university." I actually think it was that comment and make me wanting to come back. I applied to only Yale, I think, at that time, and I got admitted as the only Chinese students in that year studying economics in the School of Economics. So it was quite fantastic. But I felt later on, my experience at Yale is really focusing on what the school is all about, right? It's about innovation. It's about, be the world leader. It was not about, feeling good, right, as, studying at a good university. And I think that really changed my mindset and, like, how I really wanted to create my experience at Yale, right? Rather than really just focusing on the external glory of the name, it's focusing that what you wanted to achieve and what you wanted to experience, right? So I took a lot of classes and I was working with a professor from School of Economics on mutual fund research. And I think a lot of the work that I was doing even early then has impacted me as a human being and a professional later in the year, right? So I would say, given majority of our audience are students, I would say it doesn't really matter which school that you study in. I think what really matters is your intention, is what the intended outcome and what the experience that you wanted to have, right, with that particular university, and just focus on create that experience.
Okay. Leading on from experiences, most of your career was spent at Barclays, where you were eventually head of digital products, which involved workflow automation, data science, and the fintech ecosystem. So within a big institution like Barclays, could you elaborate on this ecosystem, how it works, and how you potentially see it evolving in the future as well?
Yes, as I said, I think the focus of nowadays in fintech, right, is really on business model innovation. And we use the word ecosystem a lot. To me, this word means a new business model where you're not alone, right, in the ecosystem to produce your own product and sell it to your customers linearly. Right? When we say ecosystem, it means you're interacting with everyone in the ecosystem, and there are tons of opportunities for partnership, collaboration, and new businesses. I think it no longer requires a linear mindset, right, of producing and selling, right, or just connecting with my customer, that's it. It now requires the mindset of a platform and, how you position yourself, and then to help and enable everyone else in the ecosystem to become successful. Because in the ecosystem, right, there are buyers, there are sellers, there are facilitators, there are utility providers, content providers. So I think the key is how one can intelligently connect with different kinds of players and create revenue opportunities that ultimately makes 1 + 1 + 1 greater than 3. Also now, right, after my years at Barclays as a transformation coach, I see the key for business success going forward is really the mindset of the ecosystem, is how you can focus on collaboration while generating value creation.
We briefly touched on cutting edge technology there and the ecosystem. Obviously, companies such as Apple, Microsoft, and Google, they use machine machine learning and artificial intelligence a lot more these days than before. How do banks and financial institutions use machine learning and artificial intelligence as well?
Yeah, so I will keep the answers to this question more generic, right, rather than referring directly to Barclays. I think machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep learnings, these are becoming buzzwords for the industry. Almost everyone is using and applying AI to their businesses. Everyone is an AI solution firm, right? But the results can really vary. But I would say over the last 15 years, as I've been working with machine learning and AI myself, I think thanks to the development of the technology itself and really made it available through the open source community, I think you see more tangible results applied to financial services right now compared to probably 10, 15 years ago. I think some of the key areas of focus include the number one is you see more of development in data and analytics. Meaning, similar to just Netflix, right? We all have in our daily life that you sometimes will get a recommendation to what you have watched and suggest, right, what are the areas that could be area of interest. And you see banks and financial services and started to really utilizing the vast majority of the data they have access to and started to generate predictions and recommendations and use workflow tools and notifications, right, to send it and make it available for not only their employees but also their clients. I think the second area is focusing on workflow and automation, where it works very similarly to Siri or Alexa, right? Where you leverage some of those intelligent bots that really surface important information to you and make the employees smarter employees, right? So they don't have to go to 20 different sources and find the information they need to generate their business and serve their clients. I think the number three is what I see most is on innovation and new business models, right? So you could see the initiatives that attempt to mine the vast pool of data that we have made available and identify new business opportunities, right? Because without looking the data that way, you probably traditionally wouldn't really make connections, right, between one counterparty to the other. And now by really looking at the data, you see, actually some things that doesn't really seem to have some deep connections and started to make sense of pulling them together. And you also see a lot of the utility functions emerge, right? Leveraging the vast majority of the data and the community and the ecosystem, such as there are utility functions in providing KYC services, right? As a utility for the industry and really generate revenue from both buy side and sell side. And then by really tackling this, I would say common denominator or like a common problem that the industry as a whole is facing.
And in your role, how far out are you looking at in terms of technologies and when they're converging? For example, let's take like quantum computing. It's kind of in its infancy at the moment, but it's getting better all the time. In 10 years' time, you might have a good chance of being using it in a commercial way, but maybe a little bit earlier. Things like that, those type of technologies in the role that you had and generally in banking, in someone in the type of kind of product areas that you're looking at, how much are you looking into the future and how much is that as part of your role and how much is that is actually driven on a personal level as well, having a passion for these kind of interesting technologies?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. And I would say anyone in those roles, right, at different organizations, bring their own perspective, right, into the impact and the pipelines that they are envisioning. I think for me, as I mentioned, right, being trained as a consultant, right, really start to think very strategically, right? I think I always ask my team the question that we need to answer is not like, oh, how can you improve the P&L immediately? It's just like, how do you think the world or the finance industry is going to be in 3 to 5 years, right? So I think to start with that strategic mindset is really important because it helps you to look further beyond your immediate circumstances, right? And only focusing on low-hanging fruit. So you do have that strategic vision upfront. But with that, I think the industry and any professional is all about results, right? You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you cannot implement anything at the end of the day, it doesn't make any sense. So I think another discipline that we have distilled in the team is really focusing on the practicality of the results. Of like, with this 3 or 5 or 10-year vision as the North Star, right, to guide our direction. The question is, right, like when you dial it back, what are the immediate results you're going to achieve, right, in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and a year? And you started to see those two, meet in the middle somewhere, right, and really becomes this really good, I would say, practical roadmap that can achieve tangible results in very short period of time. And I think as we're moving along that, right, so we identified there are 4 pillars that's important for digital strategy or innovation in general, right, based on what I have discussed. Number 1 is data, right, and number 2 is analytics, and number 3 is workflow, and number 4 is fintech, right, or like a partnership and the ecosystem. And the reason with this deal at that level is without good infrastructure and data foundations, anything else is like going to fail, right? So I think we spend a lot of efforts and hidden tasks, right? Or like behind the scene works, really harnessing our data science platforms. Because without that, nothing is just stable going forward. And with that, I think the focus is really on the analytics and the signals and the recommendations. It's like, how can you make something that's usable, right? Or use something that has a business impact, right? And I think the two counterbalance each other, right? With as you're building the foundation, you also started releasing actionable insights or analytics, right? It started to generate this very positive feedback loop and keep the user engaged as well, right? So you can keep investing and building on your foundation. And in terms of the workflow, I think that's an area that I'm very deeply passionate about, because speaking of the ecosystem, right? How you can connect different players is through the workflow. It's like, how people interacting with each other and how you can leverage technology to shorten this social or like digital distance, right, between the counterparties. So I think that's an area that there's a lot of technologies out there that really helps us in terms of streamlining the existing processes and workflows and automate, right, and make it like, way faster and straight through processing, and also to innovate in terms of cutting unnecessary blockers, and then really started building connections that you were not able before. And I think the last pillar, as I mentioned, is around fintech, right? It really centered around investments, partnership, and business models, right? It's in the sense that we actually had a principal investing portfolio that we invested in a number of the strategic partners, because you wanted to grow with those partners, right, as they becoming challenging kind of disruptors for the industry. But at the same time, we also really value our collaboration and partnership with our partners, because you can learn together very quickly, right? And there are some initiatives that will co-create and work together and really use that as a proof of concept, right, or a pilot to test new ideas very quickly.
Okay. Alongside working at Barclays in recent years especially, you've basically become an entrepreneur as well. You've built several businesses, which has attracted large funding as a result of the idea and work that you've put in. So it's clear that obviously you've made your mark on fintech. What advice would you give to a younger version of yourself, say 20 years ago, and to young people in general who also want to make their mark in fintech?
That's a great question. And I would say my best advice would be starting with the end in mind. So who do you want to be in this world? And what do you envision you're doing, right? What do you want it to accomplish maybe the day when you die, right? Or when you leave the world? I think rather than focusing on immediate obstacles, immediate actions that you can take, really spend some quality time with yourself to really figure out what you want. And this is what I refer to as the end, right, to me. The reason is this purpose and motivation will be so important for you, right, to help you really, tackle all the obstacles that come in your way throughout this journey, right, because it's not going to be easy. So, for example, when I think of my purpose in life, right, I have spent a lot of time and discovered through the work with my coach that my life purpose is to be the light of the world. And that's the reason that I created my company called LIYT, right? Because what I really wanted to do is to touch every human souls, right? And to provide a lot of alternative ways, right? For people to truly get what they want in life. And I think that motivation, purpose, and mission really supported me to leave a very stable corporate job and dive into the world of unknown and to start something of my own. And I think without that, right, every single step that you take would be so challenging and difficult, and you will have a high likelihood of being like, I don't know if this is what I want, I don't know if I can do this. But with a very clear mission and purpose, I think, it's just much easier to figure out the how.
That's very interesting. I'd just like to touch on that a bit further if possible. So while I was looking into you, I saw that you were a board member on Symphony.com. You're a board member for your own startup, Women in Derivatives. So some great work going on there. You're also on the advisory board for Refinitiv. And you're also an investor and strategic advisor for Seven Chord. So with all that in mind, and we were speaking about, you being the light of the world with your personal coach, how do you keep yourself motivated and keep yourself going regardless of what you've achieved so far?
Yeah, I think to really spend the time understanding your life purpose is important. Many people may think it's a cliche, right? Or many people may feel like, it's washy, touchy feelings. But I really think, we all come to this world with a purpose. You either intentionally create that purpose or you just let it be, right? Which is a very passive way of, fulfilling your life purpose and just be a passive human being in this world anyway. So I think to really have the courage and face yourself and ask yourself some harder questions of like, what do I want to achieve and what matters to me? I think what I realized that what matters to me is, my health, like my well-being, and then my family, and also like my impact to the world, and also my connection to people around me. I think deep inside, I really wanted deep, intimate connection with people that I touch and interact in the world. And I think with that intention, it actually helped me to prioritize my time, to prioritize my day. For example, like I used to, as you probably know, in the consulting world, right? I used to work 120 hours a week, right? And even when I was at Barclays, I just work nonstop, right? And I felt like every single time I'm going on a vacation, it's never enough time. You constantly have to check your emails and etc. And even my kids, right, they will say, Mom, why you're always working? And I think with the understanding of your intention of like, what you ought to really produce or create in your life, I choose very, very consciously right now, like how many hours I work. And then when I'm with my kids, I'm fully present, right? And when I'm traveling or on a vacation, I really detach from work and really focusing on, what I wanted to create as an experience, even through travel and, hiking in this particular case. And I think that mindset has fundamentally changed my life because every single day, I know I'm here for a reason. And I know I'm here to achieve what I wanted in life rather than feel like you're a hamster, right, on a running wheel that you constantly has been pushed to doing things that you feel like you don't have control over.
And when did you start planning out that end goal? Because you obviously you have you got your mission, you got your purpose, you got a strong mindset. At what point did that kind of happen and converge?
And that's a really, really interesting question. So I would say when I was 13, 14 years old, like the typical teenage period, I'm very clear what I want in life, right? I see that I felt like I wanted to be the light of the world even back then, right? I wanted to have like a bigger impact, right? I wanted to really do something that's meaningful to the world. And I felt like that part of me was buried with a lot of the voice that I get around me from my parents, right? From, teachers, from friends, from peer pressures, or even from social media, right? As you started to see people becoming so successful in their life and career, and you started to really wonder, right, what is right for me? I think there are many years that I struggled and really trying to figure out how I can optimize my time in life, right, in the world. How can I do something with the least amount of efforts but truly achieve, the biggest potential? And that's where you realize you're stuck, right, into this unrealistic goal that everyone else has set for you just because they think it's great, right, to work on Wall Street, and just because someone think, making $1 million means something. Right, and I felt like there was a long time that I felt like I was motivated by those external factors, right? Like I want a promotion, or I wanted to be on this board, right? Or I wanted to make $1 million, or I wanted to be an investor just because everyone else is doing it. And I think when I get much older, it's probably, I would say, 7, 8 years ago, I really felt like I hate my mid-year crisis. You all of a sudden felt like there are so many things in your life that requires your attention. And that's also a great opportunity to really sit down with yourself, right? And listening to what you have to say. And I think the more that you quiet your mind, the more you can really hear your inner voice. And that's where I realized that, you know what? I don't want it to live a life that fulfill other people's expectations. I don't want it to do something that make my parents proud. I don't want it to do something that makes, all these 5,000 people following me on LinkedIn be like, oh my gosh, she's awesome. Because I realized that those external achievements doesn't really give you long lasting fulfillments in the heart, right? So I started to really practicing listening to my own wisdom and listening to my own heart. And that's where I realized that by, being a coach at this time in my life is going to provide me what I needed, right? Both from financial stabilities, but also from like my purpose, like what do I want it to achieve? Do I know if I wanted to be a coach 10 years from today? I would say no. But I know my purpose will not change, right? My purpose of being the light of the world will not change. And I think as we keep on this journey, you will always figure things out along the way, right? But I think right now, I know like with very strong conviction that this is the thing that I wanted to work on, right? And this is the thing that I think it really brings who I am. And then let me to serve the world and then really create my own reality, right, in the way that I wanted.
Talking about coaching and development, you also served as a mentor and ambassador for the Barclays Open Innovation Platform, where you coach fintech startups and companies for growth and development. Obviously, now you have your own startup called LIYT, where you coach individuals and companies as well for growth and development. With that in mind, what opportunities do you see arising in the fintech space in the next 3, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say where there is a will, there is a way, right? Because in the past, when we look at, predictions for the next 3 to 5 years, right? I think usually we're very limited, right? Based on what we know. And I think the pandemic teaches us a great lesson, right? Because you can never predict, but you just envision, right, what you want, and something might come, right, one way or the other. So I would say when I look at the fintech space, right, especially for the next 5 to 10 years, I usually do not start with what we already have, right, because we know that's going to be limited. I think my approach is really to think about, the gaps or the opportunities that we as human beings are facing, right, or the industry or some of the problems that hasn't really been solved, right, and like what do you want to have in 5 or 10 years, and someone will make that a reality. So I would say a couple of the areas that I have been personally focused in, as you mentioned, right, I'm like a angel investor, and I also started to invest as an LP in like some of the emerging fintech VC firms, right? And I have this luxury of really putting my money and my energy where I feel most passionate and personal connected to. So a couple of the areas, for example, the number one that I see there are a lot of opportunities is in payment. And the reason I said that is there has been huge development in the payment space recent years, but there's definitely more to do. For example, I have recently traveled to Peru for a 7-day hiking trip, right? It was phenomenal. As a person, usually don't use cash nowadays, right? So I bring 2 credit cards with me and then 1 debit card with me. But when I got to Peru, I don't have any cash left, right? So I went to the ATM to hopefully get some cash. And they asked me to put my password. And of course, I forgot because I never used the debit card in the United States. And as a result, after probably attempting to put in my password for 3 times, my card got taken away. So they said, for security reasons, I have to return your card. And all of a sudden, I don't have a debit card. And I don't know how to really get money, right? Because there are still a couple places, even though majority of the places can take credit card, but there are some street vendors and stuff, right, has still require cash. So I have been very innovative. For example, I talked to my travel agencies. I said, can I pay you PayPal? And you gave me cash instead. So that's what we did, right? So I paid them $200 in PayPal. And PayPal, I think, charged me 5.5%, which is very high, right? And they gave me some cash in return so I can get some souvenirs along the way. And the reason I said that is this is very contrary to my experience 5 years ago when I was in China. So I haven't been back to China for a long time, but 5 years ago when I back to China, every single person in that country is using WeChat for payment, including the street vendors, right? You can get an ice cream, popsicles, or even like, fruit, like sliced watermelon on the street. Everyone has a QR code. All you need is to scan it. No one uses cash anymore. And I think those 2 experiences really started to paint the picture of the art of possibilities in the payment space, right? I think the demand is extremely high and the technology is easily available. So the question is someone, right, can pull this together, and that will create huge opportunities, right, in the world and in all different kinds of markets to really kind of tackle this problem. So I think, in addition to payments, 2 other areas that I have really been focusing on. The second one is digital assets and blockchain. I think there has been enough has been said, right, in the space of digital assets, right, especially hinted by the recent movement in the market. But I think the underlying theme that we actually have been talking about, right, is the value of the intangibles. Because we all know, right, when something is backed by gold, there is a value. But when something is backed by nothing, right, what is the real value? And is that a value, right, out of the intangibles? I think it's a philosophy question, but it's also an opportunity to see growth. So for example, my kids, they all love to play Roblox, right? And within Roblox, you have a lot of coins, right, that becomes values. Later on, you still need to pay for them, right? But you can create a lot of things that you can trade with each other. So I started to see there's a lot of movement, right, in the digital asset space, right, in the sense that how can you change something, whether it's tangible or intangible, right, into like a currency or value creation mechanisms. I think that's something that's really interesting, right, and it's going to have a lot of breakthroughs and disruptions, right, in terms of the new business model and value creation. And also just the idea of the blockchain technologies, right, in the sense of decentralized finance. And you realize the entire financial service industry is built on the concept of the intermediaries, right? So the question is how technology can be used to really decentralize and then remove some of the intermediaries that are not necessary, right? And inject with the ones with either utilities or functions or technologies that really makes it easier for people to connect with each other. I think it's just so fantastic in terms of the amount of opportunities that we're going to get. I would say the last one on my list will be challenging bank. And the reason I said that is all the way tied back to the definition of fintech, right? A lot of people say fintech is financial services reaching out for tech, and techfin is technology companies breaking into financial service. And I use the two words interchangeably, but you can see a larger trend of technology companies starting to become the new bank of the world. And sometimes, right, it will be like a smaller firms, right, that really serves as this business model innovation layer that started to really provide a rapid transformation. So I think in terms of the business model and like the new players that are going to play the role of a bank, it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, a lot of good nuggets there for our listeners. I wonder if you could combine all three. That'd be quite an interesting concept. But before we wrap up, I personally just have one question left myself, and it sort of overlaps with what we spoke before. But do you have any book recommendations for our listeners, or any routines that you follow on a day-to-day basis that you think that could be very, very useful for our listeners?
Perfect. Yeah, I have a lot of good books, but I think one from a business side is called The Business of a Platform. It's a really cool book, right, that talks about different angles of platforms, right, and how can you really strive value creation from the ecosystem. But there is another book that I really like and I have read so many times, right? It's called The Dark Side of the Light Chaser by Debbie Ford. It's a book that really supports you to do some self-discoveries, right, with yourself. Because as high achievers, right, as people who have goals and purpose and constantly, making progress in the world, I think we as a society tend to focus more on the positive traits of human being. Like someone who's ambitious, right, or someone who's dedicated are considered as better or good traits. And someone who are scared, right, who are weak, right, who are undetermined or sad or angry are considered as traits that we don't want. And we realize that one way or the other, we suppress that part of ourselves, right? And try to not be the person who are angry all the time, right? Who are just not motivated to get going. And I think the truth is that unless you can truly accept who you are, merely as who you are and what it is, there's always going to be limitations and judgment and obstacles getting your way. So I think this is a book that really helps you to dig deeper with yourself and started to discover this dark side that you cannot yet own for yourself. And then by truly embracing who you are as a whole, right, to give you the strength and power to be who you truly are in the world, right? So in other words, is to live a more authentic life rather than to live a perfect life. So I think this is a book that I really like. And in terms of the routine, I really like this question because I'm a firm believer that we are our habits, right? Our habits, of course, are created by our minds, right? But we are our habits. And for me, I think I take my night and morning routine very religiously or very seriously because I think it really defines my experience on a day-to-day basis. So every night, there's one thing that I always do, which is to plan for my day tomorrow. right? So I will probably spend 5 minutes to really think about what is my intention for tomorrow. What are the top 5 things I wanted to do for tomorrow? And I write those down every single night. I think that one thing is kind of the foundation for my day-to-day productivity or efficiencies or success. And every morning, I also look at the morning time like very seriously, because first thing first and second thing never, right? So whatever things that you think is the most important things, always schedule them early in the day and early in the week, because that way you really have the attention, band to focus on them. So every morning I wake up probably 6 and 6:30, right? And I do 5 things. I walk my dog, and as I'm walking my dog, I get some exercise, but also time with myself, right, to think it through. And I drink a very large or big cup of water, right, to get myself hydrated, and also just to bring the energy to life. And I exercise for only like 15 minutes in the morning to do something I really enjoy. I like dancing, right? So I do a little bit like a dancing move every morning just to bring the energy back to me. And then I kind of think about the intention for the day, right? Going at what I laid out last night, right? In terms of the priorities, is like, what is my intention for this day? So every single day of my life is not gone wasted, right? It's not gone like, unnoticed. It's always with the intention and the attention, right? In terms of how I want it to fulfill for every single day.
And Ying, if any of our listeners want to get in touch with you or learn more about some of the topics you've been talking about today, how can they reach you?
Yeah, I think the best way to reach me is through LinkedIn, right? You can find me Ying Cao, Yale, I think is my LinkedIn ID, right, on LinkedIn. And everyone is welcome to send me an email as well. It's Ying at LIYTcoaching.com. So LIYT coaching.com.
Fantastic. So Ying, thank you for joining us today, and Jag, thank you for running the interview.